discussing
Meditate.
halachic man's approach to reality.
Yahoo! Okay. This is what we've been waiting for, guys and gals. Okay.
Well, Joe, reality isn't for everyone.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Okay, good. Okay. Hey, where did it go? Oh, it's on the reader. Okay, fine. Halachic's man to approach to reality is at the outset devoid of any element of transcendence.
Exactly, words, Rabbi. You know what he's saying? It's not looking at star and getting so impressed that say, oh, that's proof that there is God. That's what he's saying.
In other words, yes, Joe, but transcendence means the sense of parking your consciousness at something beyond the world. Halachic man demands that everything he's looking for, including God, he find in this world, in the frames of human experience that we have with our five senses.
That's true. That's true.
Indeed, his entire attitude to the world stands out by virtue of its originality and uniqueness. All the frames of reference constructed by the philosophers and psychologists of religion, such as James, for explaining the varieties of religious experience, cannot accommodate halachic man as far as his reaction to empirical reality is concerned. Halachic man has a unique relationship. Judaism has a unique relationship to reality. Halachic man studies reality not because he is motivated, now we're getting to the nitty-gritty, by the plain curiosity the way theoretical man is. In other words, he's not motivated because I'm interested in the world, nor is he driven to explore the world by any fear of being or anxiety of non-being. Some people are so frightened by the sense of the transcendent that they devote themselves to understanding the world to reassure themselves that they are real. Nor, for that matter, does a halachic man orient himself to the world in terms of a nebulous feeling of absolute dependence on God, or yearnings for the redemption of man, or visions of a great revealed ethical ideal. Halachic man doesn't look for the big picture. Halachic man knows that by following halacha in all the little details, all the big things will come. But you don't look for the big picture. You know, sometimes people ask me, why is Judaism so complicated? It's because the world is complicated. Halachic man orients himself to reality through a priori images of the world, which he bears in the deep recesses of personality. In other words, halachic man sees the world through a halachic lens. We're going to learn a lot more about that. We may, if we so desire, call this a cognitive normative approach, because you take the world as it appears to you, as we experience the world. But it is not to be identified with the cognitive and ethical orientation of which the philosophers, the cognitive men par excellence, speak. We need to understand the next two lines. We know the cognitive man has a dual relationship to reality, an empirical a posteriori approach after the fact, an a priori approach. In other words, you have all the philosophers who say, this is the experience of the world, let us build from it, and let us not accept anything that is not in the realm of our experience. An a priori approach is like Plato and Aristotle, right? What are the fundamental perfect forms, and therefore, how do we understand the word? A priori means I work on ideas, I create a set of ideas, then I make the world fit into them. A posteriori, empirical, is like Hume. I look at the world as it is and try to find ideas that match the world as I see it.
What he is also saying, we don't learn. The halachic man does not need to study philosophers. They're up in heaven, and they don't speak to the people that need to be educated.
I would say that according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, To understand what you are not, you might need to look at the philosophers. In other words, to understand what a halachic man is, you have to understand what a halachic man is not. Rabbi Soloveitchik understood what a halachic man is because he knew the philosophers. Right.
That's good for him, but not for the other 99%.
Right, but this is the point Rabbi Soloveitchik is going to make, that you don't need to know all this stuff in order for a halachic man to work.
Exactly.
The fact is that a halachic man does not look at the world empirically, which means to say, here's the world, now what are the big ideas behind it? Or a priori, here are my big ideas, I'm going to squeeze the world and make it fit. Neither. And it need not be emphasized that the entire dispute between rationalists and empiricists centers around this problem. Isaiah Berlin writes very well about the difference between the British and German 19th century philosophers in this issue. And, the British philosophers like Hume are very skeptical and say, show me that it actually, you can see it in this world. The Germans come up with these big ideas and insist that reality fit them. Isaiah Berlin argues that from these a priori views, which he identifies with the Romantics, you end up with Marxism and fascism. So, anyways, I encourage you to read Isaiah Berlin collection of his essays on this and other topics. It is called The Crooked Timber of Humanity. Great set of essays.
That's very true.
If you've not read Isaiah Berlin, you should.
And this reality came to them because they knew all about the French Revolution.
All this stuff, well, yeah, yes and no.
There was a good beginning.
Didn't end so well.
Because in such a short time, they saw what happens going from the ideal to the...
but that's more the British. The Germans weren't bothered. And it need not be emphasized that the entire dispute between the rationalists and empiricists is centered around this problem. In truth, this agreement symbolizes two different directions of man's relationship to reality. When cognitive man scrutinizes God's words and seeks, through critical probing, to determine its nature, I'm not concerned here with the nature of the cause that precipitates cognition, as per Descartes. He arrives at two different decisions: to plunge into the very midst of reality, and to contemplate its appearance, understand its essence and structure. Cognitive man, in this instance, and this is like the human, the like, approaches the world without preconceived programs, without any elaborate preparations. He gropes in the darkness, is astonished and amazed by the plethora of phenomena, and by the chaos and void which prevail in the realm of reality, until he stumbles across a repetition of events in a certain order, which he has dimly sensed to begin. Result where he construe rules and establish laws that serve as a beacon illuminating the road on which he travels through the cosmos. And let me just see what note 17 says, please. I'm not going to go through the notes in this book. Right, so this is the positivist doctrine. David Hume, Tamak, William James, and so on. So this is Hume, this is the British. And the idealists are all the Germans, Kant to Cohen. So the Germans are all into this idea. They figure out some pure intellectual concept and then make the world fit into it. In order to overcome the mystery in existence, he constructs an ideal, ordered, and fixed world, one that is perfectly clear and lucid. Like Kant, he fashions an a priori ideal creation with which he is greatly pleased. This creation does not cause him any anxiety. It doesn't attempt to elude him, nor can it conceal itself from him. He knows it full well and delights in knowledge. Whenever he wishes to orient himself to reality and to superimpose his a priori ideal systems upon the realm of concrete empirical existence, he come with his teaching his hand, his a priori teaching. And that's Kant, and that's Hegel, and that creates all the tsaras of Marxism. But anyways, and fascism. He has no wish to passively cognitize reality in itself.
But that's
rather, first he creates the
Rabbi.
ideal a priori image, the ideal structure, then compares it to the world.
Rabbi, every one of these sentences has to be translated.
Okay, tell me what needs translation. It's clear.
For,
it's very clear. What's the issue?
For us poor people. It's clear to those that understand it, and it's muddy.
So what's not clear, Yossel? Let me hear it.
What do you mean it's not clear? The language itself is difficult. You can't keep on reading it, even paragraph by paragraph without stopping and translating
so let's stop.
what
No,
that means to us.
Let us stop and discuss it. What are we saying here?
Exactly. What are we saying here?
We're saying here quite simply. In other words, there are two ways. Let me paraphrase Rabbi Soloveitchik. There are two ways. Oh, hi, Sydney.
Good morning.
Morning.
That's
And
exactly that's the key word you just used. Let's paraphrase.
I will paraphrase it.
Right.
So basically, and again, the truth is I should have made everyone read Isaiah Berlin's essay on the Romantics in order to before this. But no, what can you do? For a fallen.
By
the way, you know who Isaiah Berlin's third cousin was.
Where can I? By the way, where can I find Isaiah Berlin's essay?
You can find them on Amazon. You can find them in your library, and you probably find them online.
Is that the name of the book?
Well, the most comprehensive book of his individual essays is called The Crooked Timber of Humanity. But he also has an entire book on the Romantics, which is very interesting.
I know. And
he has a biography of Karl Marx that he wrote when he was like 22, which is fantastic.
What's the name of the book and where do you get it?
Just look Isaiah Berlin. There's only like 15 books. I'm just saying, get it in the library, get it on Kindle, get it from one of these free services like Scripty, whatever.
What's the name of the book?
I would start with a book called The Crooked Timber of Humanity.
Crooked, is that about how do you go from romanticism to fascism?
No, it's all his essays, and he discusses these issues in some of the essays there. Or maybe I'll find you the right essay. Another example is The Hedgehog on the Fox, one of his very famous essays.
Yeah.
He addresses that issue. Anyways, but let's go back, because what I'm going to explain now is what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying. Just interesting to note, Isaiah Berlin was the last Lubavitcher Rebbe's third cousin. I guess genius ran in the family.
Yeah.
But he was the non-religious branch of the family. Okay,
let's paraphrase.
But you should know that Isaiah Berlin did come on occasion to the shul in Oxford, the Orthodox shul in Oxford, and he got an aliyah every Yom Kippur, I believe. Okay, now, so here's the family all called him Shaya. He wasn't known as Isaiah. Everyone called him. The family was known as Shaya. Anyways, so the story goes as follows: that the empiricists, like the British philosophers, like Hume and so on, their approach is, I look at the world and I attempt and I look at its reality and its confusing reality, and I attempt to find order in the world itself. In other words, what the world tells me. I only accept what I actually see and experience in the world.
Okay.
The idealists, the a priori people, which Plato and Aristotle were like this, and like Kant, they create an ideal image, right? They say, well, there are many things you can't know, and and you can't just start from the world. They start with an ideal structure, a bunch of imperatives. And once they have this ideal structure, they insist that the world confirm. Very Germanic. This is how we look at the world. We're going to squeeze everything into these categories. We're going to squish them and mash them till they fit into these boxes. And the beauty is, as Rabbi Soloveitchik says, you never have any problems because you're always explaining the world in a way that matches your preconceived notions.
Not only
I'll tell you a somewhat earthy parable why both Berlin and Soloveitchik, and not to compare myself, but yours truly doesn't like this approach. There once was a Cossack.
Well, neither does Soloveitchik himself.
No, I'm saying the great ones don't agree with this approach, and nor do I.
Because that's not how you're going to find God.
I know, but let me just share something with you. There once was a Cossack, yeah?
Yes.
And Cossacks have big mustaches?
Yeah.
So he complained once to his to his commander, to his elder Cossack. He says, tell me, I have served the Tsar. I've gone from Siberia to Poland, from Kazakhstan to the Crimean Peninsula. And wherever I go, the world smells of horse manure. Every country I go to, it smells of horse manure. So the elder Cossack says to the younger Cossack, that is because, my friend, you have a big piece of it stuck on the end of your mustache. And the point is that if you start with a structure, right, a cognitive structure, you insist on making the world fit into it, everything will always look like your
horse
original
manure.
idea, because you're not willing to accept another idea. Moreover, even when in the theoretician with his a priori system gets involved in technological utilitarian aspects of science, there too his sole aim is to reveal the parallelism that prevails between the ideal series and the concrete series. And having achieved this aim, he has fulfilled his task. He's not concerned with the concrete phenomena themselves, but only a relationship that prevails between them and his a priori ideal constructs. A good example of this is one of the things that led to Einstein's theory of relativity. So you know that sound waves only work in the atmosphere, right? Space is silent, right? Everyone knows that?
Yeah.
Good. Sound is only propagated through the atmosphere. So the late 19th century scientists like Maxwell and the like came to the conclusion that light has to propagate through an ether. There has to be some kind of very subtle atmosphere, even in space, that light waves can propagate through. Because just like sound needs air to vibrate through, so do light waves. And Einstein disproved this premise. But until Einstein came along, everyone accepted this as a premise because in their mind, you can't have waves propagating through something that has no substance. You must have an ether. And it's only when Einstein and Maxwell, actually, in the end, he did some experiments that created problems that Einstein solved. I believe it was Maxwell. Correct me if I'm wrong. Look it up after the class.
But even the speed of light has a limit on the extreme side, but it can travel slower too.
Correct. But the point was, the issue was that they could not imagine a wave propagating through empty space until Einstein proved it was possible, among other things.
Because they thought that there is ether in the air.
Right, yeah. My point is, this is a classic example of what he's talking about, that even in technology, even in reality, they have this fixed idea and everything has to fit into the fixed idea. This latter approach is that of mathematics and the mathematicians, the crowning achievement of civilization. It is both a priori and ideal. To know means to construct an ideal, lawful, unified system whose necessity flows from its very nature, right? Because the world matches math. A system doesn't require, as far as validity and truth are concerned, precise parallelism with the correlative realm of concrete qualitative phenomena. On the contrary, all we have is an approximate accord, but it's close enough to work, and that's all they care about. The concrete empirical triangle is not exactly identical with the ideal triangle of geometry, and the same holds for all mathematical constructs, but it's close enough. There exists an ideal world and a concrete one in between the two.
Wait a minute, can you define an ideal triangle? What's an ideal triangle? 90 degrees?
No, an ideal triangle, well, there are different kinds of triangles, but the point is an ideal triangle is precisely a 90-degree triangle, whatever kind it is, right?
But
it doesn't exist in the physical world a triangle that is precisely that amount of degrees. You can't do it because even if one molecule is out of place, it's not ideal. And the molecules are always moving.
Okay, we're talking about because every triangle has to have 180 degrees.
Yossel,
That's a given.
but in the physical world, there is no object that is exactly 180 degrees, because when you get down to the atoms and the electrons and the quarks,
That's
they're
true,
all moving.
of course. That's true. That's true.
And that is what Rabbi Soloveitchik means. Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying that for people who start a priori, technology is not a problem because they start with a mathematical idea and reality approximates the math sufficiently for their purposes. But it's never exactly the same because reality is chaotic and messy. And this actually breaks down something Rabbi Soloveitchik doesn't discuss. When you get to the quantum level, all of a sudden you have problems. And we know that quantum behavior does not match any known human logic, right? It's its own logic. Richtig? Okay. But Rabbi Soloveitchik doesn't address it.
You have to paraphrase.
What he's saying is that even the person, that even when you deal with technology and pure science, the a priori philosopher says, okay, here's mathematics, here's these ideal structures, and the world matches them sufficiently, right? A triangle has 180 degrees, but it's not a true pure triangle because no physical object can be exactly 180 degrees because there's a little electron moving somewhere.
So that's the difference between Newton and Einstein.
Well, no, because even Einstein follows certain mathematical principles, and that math is not precisely the physical reality because a light particle isn't always exactly in the place that the relativity equation says it will be, whether it's a wave or a photon, right? And there's that fuzziness which the quantum science suggests is inevitable and absolute, but it's good enough for the equations you need. There
Right.
exists, now here's the big words, there exists an ideal world and a concrete one, and in between the two, only an approximate parallelism prevails. You understand?
Yeah.
Beautiful statement.
Yeah, but that's what we learned from Einstein, that there is no straight line. That
but
light
Joe,
always bends.
Joe, Einstein is still using mathematics. What quantum mechanics tells us is that at the quantum level, there is no exact equation, and there is no way of knowing exactly, and things are many possibilities at once. I'm just saying that this theme breaks down with the most modern science. Okay. In truth, not only from a theoretical ideal perspective, does mathematics pay no attention to concrete correlatives, but even from a utilitarian standpoint, the mathematical approach has no desire to apprehend the concrete world per se, but seeks only to establish a relation, parallelism, and analogy. In other words, if the equation is good enough for the plane to take off and land and not fall out of the sky, that's good enough.
That's true. It's good enough to fly from one place to another.
And now we come to Halachic man. So there are two ways. Let us review, ladies and gentlemen. There are two ways to look at reality if you're cognitive. Forget about the religious dude. If you're cognitive. Number one, I look at the world and I look at each set of phenomena, my experiences, and try to make sense of how to glue those together. And the other is I come with ideas, with philosophical categories, with mathematical categories, and insist this is reality, and try to get the world to fit into it as best as I can. So you start from the world and work your way to ideas, or you start from ideas and work your way to the world. And by the way, I just want to make the point that intuition, human intuition, works from the bottom up. In other words, the Rav is talking about philosophy, but I would like to talk a little bit about technology. In other words, sometimes people come up with solutions. So in years back in NASCAR, you know, the stock racing thingies.
Yes.
There was a fellow, he wasn't Jewish, so it sounds like a Jew. It's a fellow named Smokey Eunuch. And he was a brilliant engine builder. And you had like GM and Ford, and they were trying to, and they had all these back then basic computers and slide rules and engineers, and they built engines that were very powerful. But Smokey's engines were always a little bit more powerful. He somehow managed to get the intake and the exhaust system in such a way that the engine breathed in the most efficient way. I mean, modern computers have shown he's right. So they asked him once, how do you do it? You don't have the engineers, you don't have the computers. You're a guy who grew up, you grew up fixing up engines for people who were running moonshine. How do you do better than the Chevy and Ford guys? So he says, you know what? He says, I imagine that I'm a molecule of air and I'm bumping along through the intakes of my engine, and I just figure out how I would like to best go if I was a molecule of air. And just with that intuition, he built a better engine than all the big engineers. In other words, sometimes you can start from reality and work your way up to theory, and it works, and it works. And the other approach, the most common approach, is start from theory, work to reality. So halachic man takes neither approach to reality. Because halachic man comes to reality, he already has not a theoretical overlay of how the world should be. He has an overlay that is built to deal with the world as it is. Okay, so this is what we're going to say in this chapter. In other words, when you come with halachic man comes to the world with the Torah, right? So the Torah doesn't, Aristotle divides creatures into levels of intellect and so on. And the cognitive man will either divide them by function, as Aristotle does, or by looking at their genetics and looking at their internal organs and their place on the evolutionary tree. Halachic man comes with a definition of the living things of the world into kosher and non-kosher and so on and so forth. In other words, halachic man comes with a unique frame, a unique overlay that is neither a priori nor a posteriori. When halachic man approaches reality, he comes with his Torah, given to him from Sinai in his hand. In other words, on one hand, halachic man is concerned with the world. On the other hand, he comes with something that comes from the ultimate transcendence from God. And this is a very important point. Halachic
Rabbi,
man,
could you, well, but what if the Torah would be a priori?
it is and it isn't, because the Torah is not concerned so much with a set of fundamental philosophical principles as it is with what you are supposed to do with the world when you're here. On one hand, it comes from God. On the other hand, it's concerned for example, the fact that a dolphin breathes air. From a Torah perspective, a dolphin is a fish because it lives in the sea and swims in the sea. And therefore, it's a non-kosher fish. The fact that it's more closely related, empirically, to the cow than it is to the carp doesn't really make a difference to the Torah.
Rabbi, I think that we are
They use that
either
as
we're
part
going
of
to.
Well, a minute, Joe,
tabernacle.
let Bob finish. Go ahead, Bob.
Didn't they use the dolphin as part of the tabernacle?
Seals.
I thought it was a dolphin.
It says seal skins, but it was probably neither. According to the Medrash, it was a unicorn.
Wait, go back to Soloveitchik.
Rabbi,
Yes, my
I
son.
don't know if that's the point, if he's going to talk about it, but it seems to me that we were talking about how do you discover God? How do you know that there is God? And what Soloveitchik so far is saying, I am so happy that my father and grandfather already discovered, and I accepted it from them. That's what he's saying.
Well, he's saying something else too, Joe. He's
Soloveitchik
saying that
didn't
a
have
halachic man is not so concerned with discovering God because he knows God exists.
How does he know?
He
What?
accepts it.
He's accepting it. He doesn't.
He accepts it because he knows that he knows that you know what? The true halachic man, remember, this is the ultimate litvak. The true halachic man, you know how he knows God exists? Because it says so in the Torah.
Okay, fine. So that's a good way to do it.
But look, the point is over here. As we talked earlier about the homo religiosus, yeah?
Yes.
That if you look at the universe, you understand that the why of the universe is not in the universe, but beyond it. There are a lot, Joe. Let me make a very clear point before we go any further. Because now we've left all this philosophical general and we're moving into the unique of Judaism.
Exactly.
But let me make a very, very important point. There are a lot of ways to know God. Rabbi Soloveitchik illustrated in his discussion of the homo religiosus different ways of knowing God. Through creation, through philosophical exploration. The bottom line is that the halachic man, however he or she gets there, and we don't care how he or she gets there, knows that God exists. Now, once you know God exists, the next question is, and this I'm going to paraphrase Albo, is if God exists, what does God want from existence? And because we can ask the question, it stands to reason God answered the question. And the next step is that since God exists, and since God must have had a purpose for creation, did he ever communicate? And the answer is yes. There was Matan Torah, the event at Sinai, which is the most empirically proven historical event in history. God talked to humanity. So that's how we know. So the halachic man knows that God exists, and God communicated with man and gave in particular the Jewish people the Torah. That is what halachic man knows. How halachic man resolves within him or herself that God exists, we discussed in the previous 5 chapters. It's not important for our discussion now. In other words, you know, if you look, you like talking about Einstein, Joe, right? So what's Einstein's constant?
Meaning what?
What is Einstein? You like talking about relativity. What is Einstein's constant? What is his constant in the equation?
E equals MC
The speed of
squared.
light.
Very good, Yossel. The speed of light. That's a constant. That it's 186,000 miles a second, okay? In a vacuum, okay?
Yeah.
So now, the halachic man has the same constant. God exists, and God communicated with man by giving the Torah at Sinai. How do you get there? Soloveitchik isn't concerned. The Kuzari talked about it. Albo talked about it. Maimonides talked about it. There are plenty of ways of getting there. That's not our concern. Halachic man has 2 constants, 2 a priori principles. 1, God exists. 2, he gave us the Torah at Sinai. Okay? You want to discuss those? That was the first 5 chapters. Right now, we've accepted these 2 things as axioms. Okay? You know, in geometry, there's axioms, right?
Yeah.
That can't be proven but are self-evident. These are our 2 axioms. God exists, and he gave us a Torah at Sinai.
This is okay for Soloveitchik. What about the other 90% of Jews, let's say, around the world, in the United States especially? How do you get him to accept that?
By the first 4 chapters.
His father didn't teach him. His grandfather already
Yossel.
didn't teach him.
Yossel, I'll answer.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. I know literally hundreds of people who grew up in very basic American Jewish households, who went to shul 3 times a year, you know, who went to Hebrew school and ran away from Hebrew school because it was boring and they wanted to play Little League, right?
Yeah.
So how did and now these people are deeply observant Jews.
Come on, Rabbi.
How did they get
there? Some may be true, but the numbers don't prove it
and never mind the
all.
numbers. Where this sampling, how did they go away from the way they were raised, which was not thinking about God at all? And the answer is they thought about it, and for everyone it was a different experience.
That's
For
true.
one person, it was, you know, it was the Rocky Mountains. For another person, it was, it was seeing the joy of a Simchas Torah. You know, for a third person, it was looking into the eyes of a truly righteous person. On and on and on and on. But the point is that there are many different paths by which a person says, hey, there's something bigger than me here. Some people have near-death experiences. Some people simply sat and thought about it. And you know, some people studied were medical students and looked at the amazing system of the human body and said, wow, it must have a designer. There's a million ways to get there, Joe. And many
I
people
know there is a million ways
Joe,
of getting there, but
it is our
nothing...
job, and it has been my job my whole life, to communicate with these people and to open doors for them. That is what we are here for. And every one of you, because each one of you knows a lot about Judaism, has an obligation to find people and show them the way. Okay.
It's
now,
by example.
Not
That's
just by
how they
example.
know.
You also have to teach them. You also have to grab them by the lapels.
I know,
You said,
but
hey,
that's
lift
that's
up your
the
eyes and see
example.
there's a God and a purpose to the world. I mean, I don't actually grab people by the lapels, but you know what I mean. Okay.
Well, it's okay.
Halach, an entire corpus. So he orients himself to the world by means of fixed statutes and firm principles. In other words, Halach man doesn't have to figure out how to connect God to the world and what his purpose is, because he comes from Sinai with a system that tells us this is how you relate to the world.
Yeah,
how do you relate to time? Shabbat. How do you relate to the animal kingdom? You can eat these, you can't eat these. How do you relate to ethics? This is what you can do in business, this is what you can't do in business. An entire corpus of precepts and laws guides him along with a path leading to existence. A halachic man, well furnished with rules, judgments, and fundamental principles, draws near the world with an a priori relation. But it's not a philosophical a priori relation. It's not some philosophical vision of how the world is structured. It's a practical vision of how do I interact with the world. Chicken, yes. Frog, no. And so on. And we will explore this further next time. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask all of you for any concluding thoughts before we go.
So here is a perfect example. If a non-believing Israeli looks at the Haredi community, he has a hard time, because on one side, they're the one that says we have the answer to God, it's all in the halacha and all that, and then he observes how they live and how they raise their children, and he says there must be something better.
I don't know. Not necessarily. I think,
not necessarily, but unfortunately, well,
But you know what? But Joe, if you look at the behavior of the typical Tel Aviv 18-year-old, I'll pick the Haredi 18-year-old.
Well, I don't know. You can always find them, but
Joe, have you ever heard the Israeli term tipesh esrei?
What? Say it again.
Tipesh esrei. It's a term for teenagers. Tipesh esrei. The foolish years.
Tipesh esrei.
Tipesh esrei. Yeah, it's an expression.
Like May is tipesh chodesh. It's a crazy month.
Right. So there's a tipesh esrei. The teens are crazy years because they're running around in the nightclubs, and the Haredim are sitting and learning Torah and doing good deeds and doing acts of charity. So let's not knock them. Okay, people, have a wonderful day, everyone.
Have a wonderful day.
This week, we're on every day of the week.
Where did we stop here?
7 lines down in chapter 6.
Oh, page 19.
Correct.
Hello. All right.
And okay, everyone. So
I understand.
Join us in the morning. We have services and learning. We're doing the whole week. Okay, everyone. All the best, except for Purim, of course. Friday, we don't have any classes. We do have services. Look at your email.
That's a terrible day for Purim. Friday.
What time is your Megillah? What day is the Megillah?
Thursday night.
At what time?
I think when Ma'ariv's around 6, Megillah's a little bit after.
6:05.
4 o'clock my time. Okay.
Oh, you're still in Arizona?
Yes. Now next
Well,
Sunday.
don't you have a Megillah reading in Arizona?
Yes, I'm going to do it here. Okay. And next time, I won't see you next Sunday, but the Sunday after B'ezras Hashem.
Okay, so just read chapter 6. You'll be up to date.
All right. Well, listen, I'll try.
When are you coming back, Sydney?
Next Sunday.
Oh, next Sunday.
Yes.
All right.
Well,
that's
you'll be
beautiful.
all sober.
What?
You will be all sober.
Whatever. Okay.
Sober.
Sober. You know what sober is?
I don't believe in sobriety. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Kol Tov.
Okay.
Shavua Tov.